And now, ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello out there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of BOA Audio Season 3. It is November 17th, 2007, and this week we have literally a very special episode for you. It is our first theme episode of the season. As we covered at BOA in early October, I was lucky enough to be in attendance at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash, which is essentially the biggest paranormal conference in the New England area. We covered it in depth in text form at the BOA website, but of course what you're here for is the audio interviews that we captured on site during the big esoteric double bill. So we're going to keep the intro short and sweet this week. Here's the rundown of guests in order: Loren Coleman, Chris Balzano, Don Keating, Carl Feindt, Don Ledger, and Chris Stiles. We'll have little intros for each of the guests, but we're going to eschew the normal biographies that we usually do at the beginning of the program. You can find all the great bio information on the guests at their appropriate websites, so we'll be plugging their websites throughout the show. With the exception of the Don Keating portion of the program, these interviews were recorded over the weekend of October 12th and 13th on location at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash. So without any further ado, let's rock and roll. We're going to kick it off here first with Loren Coleman, talking about the Dover Demon case, the Bridgewater Triangle, the Virginia Tech shootings, and tons more. It is the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash special on BOA Audio Season 3. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here on location at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash. We're on the first night here. Loren Coleman's here. I've been hanging out with him for the afternoon. I don't know, Loren, let's start out. What are you here to present at the Mass Monster Mash?
Well, I'm going to be here to present just specifically on the Dover Demon case. That case in April of 1977, when 4 individuals over the space of 21 hours saw this creature from who knows where.
Sounds exciting. How about a little update? We had you on the show about a year and a half ago at this point, April of 2005 or something like that. How about a little update? What's going on in the Bigfoot world in the last year or so? How's it look? Is it promising? Is it unpromising? I've seen some various type of video rumors going on, but you never know with that kind of thing. But give us a little update on the Bigfoot scene.
Well, I think at that time there was a lot of interest coming out of Malaysia, and that's really died down quite a bit. There was a hoax over there that really kind of put to rest a lot of interest. But what's occurred since then is there's been many reports from Native American reservations out west, and that's got people excited because what's occurred is the tribal police have actually done some thermal imaging of the Bigfoot, and they're trying to convert that to ways in which we can analyze it a little bit more. So we're excited by that.
No, I did a little. I was telling you about how I did a little investigation into the Bridgewater Triangle, and you're kind of credited with naming the Bridgewater Triangle. So talk about the Bridgewater Triangle, what it is, and sort of how you came upon the whole thing and sort of put it all together and crystallized it as the Bridgewater Triangle.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, and when I was there and writing my book, Mysterious America, in the early 70s, I started noticing that there's certain places that have specific names that both the locals, either the natives or the colonial type people, would name because it was sinister. And it's often the devil names and Fortean places was the title of my article. Then I moved to New England in 1975. And what I discovered was there's this concentrated area in southeast Massachusetts around the Bridgewaters that had a lot of reports. And so I actually saw that there were 3 Bridgewaters there. There's the east, west, and Bridgewater, and I saw it was a natural triangle. But what really was happening was there's an extended area, 200 square mile area, that forms a triangle. So I started calling it the Bridgewater Triangle. And there were all kinds of reports, UFO reports, missing people reports, strange crimes, Black Panthers, Bigfoot, giant snakes from the CCC days. And I really decided that by using the name the Bridgewater Triangle, people could start associating all of this phenomena with one area and then be able to talk to me in a clearer fashion. So the word actually helped. And then I wrote an article for Boston Magazine and did some lectures in different areas, and it just kind of stuck.
There you go. Maybe talk a little bit about the Dover Demon for people who don't know what it is and that kind of thing. So we'll sort of catch them up on that.
Well, the Dover Demon was seen in April '77, as I mentioned. And what occurred was this individual in his car with some buddies was driving along Farm Street, and all of a sudden, along this stone fence, he noticed a creature that was about 4 feet tall, except it was down on all fours. It had long, spindly fingers, very thin body, no mouth, and just two huge glowing orange eyes. And this guy had a photographic memory. He's now today, some 30 years later, he's a well-known artist around the area. But he went home immediately that night. He was, just a teenager, and he painted and he drew this thing because he was obsessed with it, almost a Close Encounters of the Third kind of an obsession. And what occurred later that night, another individual 1.1 mile away was in another part of Dover, and they saw this thing walking down the road, and they thought it was a high school buddy with a large head. So he kept yelling out, "Hey, MJ, is that you?" And it wasn't him. The creature actually ran away, went into a gully, then went up and leaned against a tree, and its glowing eyes were looking out at it. He went home and did a drawing too. These guys didn't know each other, had the sighting. And then a few hours later, a couple in a car saw a thing crossing a road with also this kind of figure eight head. And what was different about this is the woman in that instant said that the glowing eyes was green and not orange. What happened was a couple days later, I noticed at the Dover Country Store that there was this drawing this woman that was working there was looking at, and I said, "What's that about?" She knew that I'd written a book and was interested in Creatures of the Outer Edge was the book that I had written. And so she gave me the name of the person, and I went. And what happened is I very quickly interviewed all the principals, found that they hadn't contaminated each other by talking to each other yet. And yet I wanted to do another round of interviews, and so I got in Walter Webb and some MUFON people who had expertise in interviewing from UFO area, because there aren't that many cryptozoologists around the block, Yet I wanted people that were open to something that was unusual and something that was, needed some in-depth interviews. Because what we did, we interviewed teachers, parents, police officers, everybody in the community in a wider circle from those individual eyewitnesses to get some credibility checks on those four witnesses. And we really built up a rather large case file on something that didn't seem to be connected to anything. We really couldn't. There were no UFOs involved. There was no, cattle mutilations. There was nothing that we might see in other cryptozoological or ufological or paranormal or hauntings. It just seemed the Dover Demon showed up. I also came up with the name Dover Demon to give it a file name, and I like alliteration, so all of that. And so that name also has stuck. It's stuck so well, the update really is that in Japan they make little figures of the Dover Demon. This artist, one of the eyewitnesses, Bill Bartlett, is now, he's shown art in some of the galleries and institutions around the Boston area. And he, in fact, really can't figure out what the Dover Demon was. And he sometimes gets upset because why do people remember me for the Dover Demon when, in fact, I want to be much more known for my art. So that's kind of the update.
Nice. Now, was this just like a one-time type of thing, one isolated incident? Did it turn into any kind of wave, or have you ever seen anything like this coming from anywhere else? Have you someone comes to you and they're like, you got to hear about the Tallahassee demon. It's the, that kind of thing. Or is it like a one-off type of incident?
It seems to be a one-time incident. The original witness a year later had an incident where he was making out with a girlfriend, and he thought he saw the Dover demon out of his peripheral vision, but he very quickly said to himself, that wasn't the Dover demon. There's some people in the UFO field that have tried to associate this with a fake film, a fake photograph from Chile. There's some people that said it's related to the chupacabra. It's not like it at all. Other individuals have tried to associate with mer beings. So there's always people coming along saying the Dover demon fits here or fits there. And I still see it as really extremely separate, very unique, and has no connection with anything else.
Okay, all right. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is we had you, like I said, we had you on the show, and we talked a lot about the Copycat Effect. I'm a huge fan of the book, and I'm really interested in that other aspect of your work. Everyone, you're a cryptozoology superstar, but I also follow your work in the other realm, in the suicide cluster realm, and that kind of thing. And we had talked about a year and a half ago, right? I don't know if it was after that. No, it was about last year. So it was about a year later was the Virginia Tech shooting, and I sort of noticed that there seemed to be sort of a dangerous new trend that came up now with the guy who shot all the people in Virginia Tech, sending the videos and stuff after he had died, or right before he went on the shooting spree. And from what I can recall from your blog, Copycat Effect, was that you thought that was kind of a dangerous thing for them to be showing that on TV, and you don't want to sort of start this new trend of shooters, trying to leave their mark or make some kind of crazy statement. They think they're going to become famous through doing this, that kind of thing. I guess just talk a little bit about the Virginia Tech shooting and that whole callback situation that happened after the fact.
Well, I think what's intriguing to me about the whole Virginia Tech is that, in fact, if you look at the fall of 2005, there were between 6 and 9 shootings that came to the attention of the media. So what I started finding is that there's this trend that happens. If there's shootings in the fall, you're going to have a hot spring. So what I did was I predicted the Virginia Tech shooting down to the week. I said it was probably going to be somebody that was really outside of the norm, not a Caucasian, somebody that would actually pick that week, the Columbine week, and here we had it happen. So there were several things going on, and then, as you say, in my blog, The Copycat Effect, I really challenged NBC News for what they did. Here they gave a platform. This kid wanted to shoot up people, and he wanted to live after he killed himself. And he was able to do it by producing videos and becoming a media star after he died. And I thought it was irresponsible. I thought it feeds right into the copycat effect. After Virginia Tech, what happens because of all the grieving, you're not going to get an immediate effect right then. But I think we're already seeing it now in the fall of 2007. The Cleveland shooting. Here is an individual who was a little separate from the culture, a Caucasian male in an African-American school, goth, Columbine style. There's absolutely nothing wrong with goth people. And I think I've been very clear in my writings about that. But what's happened, there's now a subculture of goth individuals that are the Columbine death cult. And they are definitely copycats of the original Columbine, down to the trench coat, down to the black fingernail polish, down to speaking, German, and all of those kinds of things are there.
Now, last I heard, last spring, you had re-released Mysterious America, updated, expanded, all that good stuff. Now here it is October. What's coming up on the horizon for you? What do you have that people can pick up, and what are you looking forward to in the near and distant future?
Well, there's always books inside of me, and I need to write more books. So it's there's different things on the horizon. For instance, I figure right now my Tom Slick book is under a movie option. So I'm always hopeful in 3 years or 5 years Hollywood will make the Tom Slick Yeti movie. I'm also going to redo the Mothman book and make it much more evil, because I think there's a sinister evil underpinning that is not just cryptozoological, and people need to look at that. So the Mothman Death Curse really was something that I researched after my Mothman book in 2002. So I'm really revamping the whole Mothman book. I know that there's no movie coming out, but I think that there's always going to be interest in the Mothman now. And there's other little projects on the horizon, so it's just always something's happening.
Awesome. And people can follow your stuff at cryptomundo.com, correct?
Definitely. Cryptomundo.com. And we just, I guess, heard this week that we're the #1 cryptozoology site in the world with over 200 million hits per month.
That's not too hard to believe because it's the best cryptozoological website out there. So I check it out every day. So I highly recommend people check it out. I'm sure they are. If they're listening to me and Loren Coleman talk, they know about Cryptomundo. So hey, Loren, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me here and let me drag you outside to do the interview. I had a great time talking to you. Good luck with the presentation. I'm looking forward to seeing you here and go Red Sox. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to ask you. What do you think about the Red Sox? How's it going to turn out?
Well, I think it's going to be a hard series, but at the end, the Red Sox will come through. Thank you for the interview.
All right, thanks a lot.
Take care.
There you go. That was Loren Coleman talking about all sorts of great stuff. Big thanks to Loren Coleman for taking some time out of his busy weekend there to talk with us here on BOA Audio. Of course, you can find out more information on Loren Coleman at the website www.cryptomundo.com, cryptomundo.com. Up next is Chris Balzano of the Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads. Chris is a good guy, good friend of mine here in the local area. He's got quite a few books coming out in 2008, and I am definitely pegging him as one of the breakout stars in the world of esoterica in 2008. So without any further ado, here's Chris Balzano from the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash with Chris Balzano, my good friend. We had quite an adventure exploring the Bridgewater Triangle, and he's here for the weekend. He's got a lot of good stuff on the horizon coming out. For starters, Chris, talk a little bit about what you're doing here at the Mass Monster Mash, other than rubbing elbows and networking with folks like me.
I'll actually be acting as the co-host of the event. I'll be introducing Jeff Bellinger from GhostVillage.com and Karen Mossy, who's an EVP specialist, whose work has appeared in the movie White Noise and in The Ghost Whisperer, and she's, I guess you could say, almost kind of like a family friend, so I'll be introducing her as well.
Nice. Now, like I alluded to, you have a lot coming up on the horizon. You've sort of carved out quite a niche here in the Massachusetts area for your work and stuff like that, so talk a little bit about what your main specialization is so people who are starting to get to know you can find out more.
Well, when I originally started my website, launched my website, its title was Massachusetts Ghosts and Legends, and it was really meant to kind of look at the connection between a lot of the hauntings that people were reporting, things like that, and also some of the great urban legends and legends that were coming out of the Massachusetts area. I eventually changed the name to Crossroads because I like to think that a lot of the hauntings people are experiencing and a lot of the legends people report live in that crossroads. Some of them are more legend than haunting, and some of them are more haunting than legend, but the fun is in deciding which end of the spectrum that they're on, and most of them are right there in the crossroads. So I really just began kind of reporting some of the legends I had heard and some of the hauntings I had personally experienced. And then it just kind of blossomed from there. I've been at it. I launched my website in 2001, and I've been investigating since '94. And so it's really, I've carved a niche out as a Bridgewater Triangle guy and a southeastern Massachusetts hauntings person, which is about an hour and a half away from me in Woburn. But I'm getting a lot more local stuff, and due to writing and connections that I have, working on a lot more books and material that's kind of covering all hauntings and legends across the country. So that's the exciting part of what I'm doing now is I'm kind of expanding from just a Massachusetts person to more of a United States, and seeing the same things that we see here in Massachusetts all over the country, which all of a sudden starts to make it lean more towards the legend and urban legend side than maybe genuine hauntings.
There you go. So Balzano's taking America by storm, finally.
Yes, I've got one coming out. I actually just checked last night. I am officially listed on Amazon for a book entitled Ghostly Adventures, which takes me across the entire United States, tracking down some hauntings and some personal first-hand experiences. And then I have something else in the works, which also will be much more of a United States. But I still love the Boston stuff. I still love the Massachusetts stuff, and I'd love to be able to work on both things at the same time.
There you go. I guess talk a little bit about the Bridgewater Triangle, because like I said, you and me were running around there back in April, causing trouble and stuff like that, and hassling the cops and the tow truck drivers and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So bring people up to speed on the Bridgewater Triangle and what it's all about and your experiences exploring it.
Sure. One of the things that I did when I first started was I started to contact as many people as I could find. And part of the reason I started the website was there wasn't a lot of Massachusetts-specific stuff. This was kind of before the explosion of TAPS. So there were areas covered, like there was, the New England Paranormal Research and all that kind of stuff, but nothing Massachusetts-specific. And so I made the site and then tried to contact as many local people as possible. And one of them that I found was Chris Pittman, who actually I had worked with at a sub shop for a little while that my sister owned. And so I automatically emailed him, and reading his site, discovered this vast vortex of energy called the Bridgewater Triangle, which Chris and Loren Coleman have written on a lot, having to do with cryptozoology and UFO reports and black helicopters. And I started kind of make the connection between that and a lot of the ghost hauntings I had, kind of starting with the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44 and a lot of hauntings and stories mentioned in the New England Ghost Files, which were my first inspirations to go out in the field and search for something as opposed to reporting just things that had happened to me. And so I started just to really collect a lot of ghost stories. And, of course, once you collect one and you post it, then all of a sudden people begin to find you. And I started to see that the same things that were happening in terms of cryptozoology and Bigfoot sightings and Thunderbirds, there was also a heightened level of paranormal activity in terms of ghosts. So I'd really kind of focused myself on what are the ghosts. The book that I'm just finishing up now, which hopefully will be out next Halloween, is Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. And that is just an account of all of these crazy stories. And if I asked, for an extension, I could probably get, 20 more stories because they seem to be coming in every day. And it's just, and I've actually expanded the Bridgewater Triangle, kind of, finding Loren Coleman's definition excellent for what he was doing, and yet limited in terms of, well, why can't the triangle cross state lines? Yeah. Because, if you just kind of follow that natural trail, well, first of all, Rehoboth, Freetown, which is one of the apexes, Freetown was originally part of Rhode Island, or I should say Rhode Island was part of Freetown. So I just kind of hopped the fence, went over there, and I started saying, well, if you extend those lines, you've got Newport, you've got Providence. So I decided it was, and it's the same way if you go west and if you go a little bit more towards Boston Harbor, you start seeing a little bit more. I mean, where do you cut it off is difficult. But I've kind of expanded it to include especially southeastern towns such as Fairhaven, New Bedford, Fall River, all those towns which have probably the most documented hauntings. Rehoboth is probably the most haunted town, but really New Bedford, Fall River are probably the most haunted areas that people openly talk about the ghosts that are there. So I decided to include those as well.
Now, you say you do a lot of field-type work and that kind of thing. What's some of the wild and weird stuff that's happened? Because, a lot of times when you go looking for something like that, you don't get anything. And then but then when you're driving to get milk, right, a ghost will cross the front of your car. So talk a little bit about, kind of weird stuff that might have happened on your explorations.
Probably the most activity that I've encountered that we've been able to document is a house in Acushnet, which is kind of an extension of New Bedford. And I've investigated there with Matt Moniz from Spooky South Coast, Tom DiAgostino, who is an author, actually with the same publisher that I am. He haunted Rhode Island, haunted New Hampshire, haunted Massachusetts, and his wife Arlene. And Mike Markowitz, who is an EVP specialist actually in Bridgewater. He's kind of in the heart of the storm. And we have gotten so much EVP evidence from there that it's the clearest EVPs I've ever heard. Constant talking. It really kind of opens this whole new idea into the paranormal, because there are seems like levels of, there's a hierarchy of spirits that are there that talk to one another, or there's even some that seem to discipline. So there seems to be children who make themselves very vocal, and then adults who kind of tell them to shut up, and very clearly say, they're recording this. They know all of us by name, and it seems every time we leave there that the house suffers kind of a week and a half to 2 weeks of increased activity, almost as if that's it, that's all you want to talk. Either bring in more people or now you guys talk to us. Probably one of the oddest things from that, and I believe all the members of the family when they talk and tell me the stories, is that the tenant who lives on the second floor, who's seen most of the haunting or heard most of the haunting, he's kind of it's really at the active center of the house. Kind of challenged one of the spirits. Why do you want to talk to these ghost hunters that come in, but you won't talk to me? Are you scared of me? And we had told him when we first went in there to put talcum powder as kind of a very low-tech way of monitoring things, and he went up a little while later and yes was written in the talcum powder. So whether that's true, whether he went up there and did it himself, I don't get the feeling that that's what happened. And so every time we leave there's increased activity, and I actually kind of get the feeling that it's maybe turned a little bit dark. That especially with the use of these children who are running up and down the stairs, something darker might be trying to gain entrance. So we're trying to get back there to do follow-ups. It's just a very difficult time of the year to do that. But the Bridgewater Triangle has this reputation of drawing negativity to it. It kind of goes hand in hand with Loren Coleman's whole what's in a name, places that are named after the devil or variants of the devil, Fayetteville, things like that have this weird haunting aspect to him, or this weird energy aspect to him. Hockomock is also related to the devil. It's also named for the devil. And so there's this weird energy that's there. And, you can't necessarily, record it or put it in a box. But I've had several negative encounters being there. In addition to time slips I think I've experienced on Route 79, driving there late at night. One time, I called my wife to say I was on my way home. I was just leaving kind of what's officially the Triangle. She called me up 5 minutes later to say she had fallen down a flight of stairs and her leg actually had gone through glass on the bottom of the stairs. Maybe you know about this, but my car got stuck in a ditch down there. A few days later, I got a deer tick that actually traveled all the way up my belly button and had to be surgically removed by a doctor. I destroyed one car driving on Copycat Road. I just have had these things that every time I seem to go out there, whether it's for a radio show or an appearance, or whether it's just to actually do an investigation, something bad happens to me or my wife. So can you look at that and say, it's just coincidence? Okay, well, how many coincidences make a pattern? Because it seems to me, that it's we can joke about it and laugh about it, but there is something darker there, which seems to either follow you or kind of enter your life the more you investigate. And Chris Pittman can tell you that more than anyone else, because he's taken a step back because of that darkness kind of entering his life as well. So.
Scary stuff. That's some scary stuff. Now let's hit on the clown phenomenon, okay, because I saw some stuff here on a website there with you and the clown phenomenon, and I'm dying to know because clowns are kind of scary, and I'm afraid of where this is going to go.
Sure. In I believe it was May of '82 or May or '81. I can't remember exactly which one it is. They're out of Boston. There started to be these weird clown reports where people dressed up as clowns were abducting children. Were attacking people on the streets, were causing all this kind of all this mayhem all over the city, and there wasn't one actual single reported case. But for some reason, the Boston police actually put out a bulletin to be careful of these clowns. And Loren Coleman reports that this was happening in several different cities, major cities in the United States at the same time, all of them with no actual reported instances. But the craze just kind of hit first Boston and then its suburbs, and I was living in Everett at the time. And I remember my cousin and I making signs that said, "Beware of the clowns," and holding them up to the cars as they went by. And I'm constantly getting emails from people saying, "I remember that. I remember we were scared about the clowns. Every time before we went out, we'd have to tell our parents, no, we will not talk to clowns." I mean, and some of the stories were just absolutely ridiculous. Of someone with a clown mask and nothing else on, with machine guns and any kind of variant of scary thing, axes and chainsaws and all, and they were being reported as by little kids as well. And so these little kids were reporting it. People were connecting it because they had heard a police report about it, and so it was given more weight, and it just kind of traveled across the country. It sparked up in different places and spread across the country. And a lot of people say, Pennywise must have had something to do with it. And actually, I believe that it was probably inspired in part by this kind of clown phenomenon, because it was published after that. But what did happen was, that happened in May. In February of that same year, John Wayne Gacy was convicted and sentenced to die. And John Wayne Gacy was a killer out in Ohio, I believe, one of the Midwestern towns, who brutally raped and murdered dozens of teenage and early 20s boys, probably one of the most famous serial killers. And every time they mention him, boop, they throw up that big Pozo the Clown, or Pogo the Clown, I think is what it was. He, in his free time, would dress up as a clown and go to charity events. And I think that really that image of John Wayne Gacy as serial killer and clown stuck with people. And so when they heard these whispers, it really kind of made sense to them. Yeah, remember that guy? I heard something about that, which is how all great urban legends start. I heard something about that. And so it's not dead either, because I teach high school. And one of the, we were talking about urban legends and hauntings and things like that, which I often do in my class. And some of the kids said, yeah, no, actually, that's real. And I said, well, okay, beautiful, great. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get another kind of add-on to the story. And he's like, no, that's real, because in our school, which is Robert Frost Middle School, behind there's some graffiti. It's like this satanic graffiti. And all the kids, and this goes back, more than 2 decades. Well, not more than, but more than 2 decades, report that there were, and still are, ghost clowns out there who abduct kids, take them out there, do all kinds of nasty things to them, and then kill them. And if you go back there, you'll either be like strangled by the kids whose spirits are left there, or by the killer clowns themselves. And I spoke with a person who teaches at that school and who has been there for years. She's actually now an administrator, and she said, oh yeah, everyone knows that story. It's a great, all good schools have to have a good urban legend attached to them, and or a really good haunting. And I said, well, do you remember it before 81, 82, 83? She's like, I really first remember it in 85. But from 85 to 2007, with different generations coming in, and more importantly, different people with different ethnic backgrounds and different immigration cycles, the story has still been kept alive, and it still rings true, because we're still scared of clowns. All schools are still haunted, and woods are scary. Exactly. So it's the story itself and the variants all kind of play on all the classic things that we're scared of.
So you got the book coming out in February, so probably people can pre-order it. So how can people go about grabbing the new book? Give us the title, give us the website to pick it up, and, of course, plug your website.
Sure. My website is www.masscrossroads.com, and that's Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads, and there'll be a link up to both Schiffer and Amazon and some other ways to buy the books. Right now you can pre-order Dark Woods, which is about the Freetown State Forest, and a lot of the activity there and connections, like we've been talking about, that multifaceted aspect of the triangle, by going to schifferbooks.com, or just Google Schiffer, Schiffer Books, and you can take you there. Or you can actually go to Amazon.com, and you can pre-order Ghostly Adventures, which is the one that's more about the United States. So the release date on that, according to Amazon, is July. So I was told maybe earlier than that, but that's what Amazon has it listed as.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for doing the interview and let me drag you outside to do it and all that good stuff. And once the books get rolling, get in touch with me. You live literally like 5 minutes from my house, so get in touch with me and we'll have you on the show for a full-blown super episode. A big sit down without the wind and coffee and all that good stuff interview. So hey, thanks a lot, and thanks for taking me out to the Bridgewater Triangle last year. It was a good time. And look forward to
along, Tim.
further adventures between the two of us.
Excellent, me too. So we'll talk as soon as hopefully before the books come out. So
definitely. There you go. That was Chris Balzano, folks. Keep an eye on him. He is going to be one of the big names coming to the surface in the world of esoterica in 2008. You can find out more on him at masscrossroads.com, masscrossroads.com. Up next is Don Keating to talk about the White Bigfoot and Ohio cryptozoology. After our original recording was damaged by tremendous winds as we taped it outside, Don was cool enough to sit down and talk with me this past weekend on November 11th to pretty much recapture the interview that we did at the Triple M conference. So without any further ado, here's Don Keating. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not on location at the Mass Monster Mash Mass UFO show. We're doing a little post-show interview here with Don Keating. We actually taped one at the event, but we were really felled by some awful wind that was going on. That's the problem when you tape an interview on the outside of the building, I guess, but live and learn, I suppose. And thankfully, Don Keating has been really cool enough to sit down and talk to me here a little bit so we can do a little touch base and not excise him from the special. And Don Keating is from the Eastern Ohio Bigfoot Investigation Center. You can find them at eobic.com. Don, thanks for taking some time here to catch up from the conference.
No problem, Tim.
For starters, I guess just share with people, what you were presenting on at the conference and talk a little bit about your presentation for the folks who couldn't make it but are listening to the special to get the scoop.
All right. Well, what I did at the conference was I gave a talk on a couple of pieces of videotape that I've shot over the years. One was in August of 1992 in western Coshocton County, Ohio. This was a piece of videotape that I shot purely by accident. It's an individual walking down the road, a country road, that appears to be a rather tall, light-colored individual. And many people who have seen the videotape over the years believe it could be the image of a light-colored Sasquatch creature. In April of 1995, within a couple of hundred yards of the same location of August 92, I shot another piece of videotape. This was when 6 or 7 individuals were located in, again, western Coshocton County doing research. And this was a little longer piece of tape. The image of a light-colored individual, once again, was walking down a grass trail, and you could not only see the individual walking on the trail, but you could see the reflection of it in this body of water. And that's what I did. I basically presented those two pieces of videotape. John Horgan has been a good friend of mine for several years, and he has been very intrigued by these video clips and thought it would be interesting to have me present them to the attendees at the Mass Monster Mash, which I was more than happy to do. So that's what I did, and I've never said that these pieces of videotape ever show a Bigfoot-type creature, so to speak, because I don't know what they are, but they are quite intriguing, to say the least.
Definitely. I was stunned when I was seeing those videos at the conference. They were just amazing. Talk a little bit about the white Bigfoot, because a lot of people obviously are they're familiar with the classic Bigfoot, but I was pretty surprised that there is this white Bigfoot. And I guess talk a little bit about the white Bigfoot, how you sort of became first interested in the white Bigfoot aspect of the Bigfoot phenomenon, and how prevalent is this white Bigfoot, and share some information on that with us.
Well, I first became involved in a white Bigfoot because of a sighting that I myself had back in September of 1985. I was doing active field research at a location just south of Newcomerstown, Ohio, and since then I've done the typical research on Bigfoot encounters or Bigfoot track discoveries, but I've also had a very keen interest, more so than usual, probably, in the reports of the light-colored or white-colored Sasquatch creatures, not only because of my own sighting, but because of the clips of videotape that I've shot. I think there are more light-colored creatures out there than what people tend to think. The typical description has always been a black or a dark hair-colored creature, standing 7 to 9 feet tall. And because of my own sighting in 85 and then the subsequent videotapes that were shot in 92 and 95, I've just had a very keen interest in the light-colored creature. And there have been more reports of light-colored individuals than what the general public might think.
Yeah, and we kind of had a little laugh about it because I was talking about how back when I was watching the cartoons, I thought the only white Bigfoot was the abominable snowman.
Yeah.
Is this white Bigfoot, is it a geographical anomaly, where it's only sort of seen in certain parts of the country, or is it sort of just run with the rest of the Bigfoot pack wherever they're found?
Well, it's not just in the Midwestern part of the U.S., but other parts of North America as well. there have been reports of light-colored creatures from all corners of North America, and that's what's very intriguing. The question has to come up, is this genetic? Is it albinism? Is it an albino creature? Is it because they're getting old and they start to turn gray or white in color? There are several questions regarding the light-colored Sasquatch creatures that have been seen, and of course, to this point in time, we don't have any specific answers, but only to theorize and speculate as to what it may be.
And you said that you were shooting the film footage on 2 different occasions in the same areas. Now, is this like a notorious Bigfoot area for sightings in Ohio, or because I think you may be talking about the Bigfoot Triangle, right?
Right. There have been a lot of activity, tracked discoveries and sightings reported in these geographical locations, and in fact, it is in the midst of what is known as the Sasquatch Triangle in east central Ohio. We had been in that location for 2 or 3 years at the time. In 1992, we first started going out there in 1989, May of '89, and so we had been in the one location for just over 3 years, and that's when the videotape was shot in August of '89 or August of '92. So yeah, it's the one geographical location in Ohio is the most active. And if you take a map and you draw 3 pinpoint locations from Newcomerstown, Ohio, southwestward towards Conesville, Ohio, and then southeastward to Salt Fork State Park, Ohio, you come up with what is known today as the Sasquatch Triangle in eastern Ohio.
I'm benefiting here from hindsight because we originally did the interview before I saw your presentation. One of the things that I found really fascinating is almost a sociological sort of thing, and that's that you said you had put together sort of a group, like a meeting thing for people who were interested in looking into the Bigfoot. And you had like 35 people the first time, and then you had another meeting, and then you had 20 people, but the 20 people weren't from the original 35. Can you talk a little bit about that story and the interest that's been generated there in Ohio for your research group?
Yeah, back in July of '85, we held our first meeting. It was only going to be a one-time event. I wanted to see if people would, so to speak, come out of the woodwork so we could get some fresh reports. Mm-hmm. And those people in attendance, I said, how many would be interested in having another meeting? They all raised their hand. The funny thing, as you said, the next meeting, none of those people showed up, but there were brand new faces there. I've been holding meetings on a regular basis since July of '85. And I've been holding an annual Bigfoot conference once a year since March of 1989. And over the years, people of all professions, have come to the meetings from all across North America, the conferences as well. And it's one of these things where you've had, skeptics and believers alike that have come to the conference and the meetings, and you've had eyewitnesses, track discoverers, people who have heard noises and things like this. So it's something it's kind of grown on its own. It's as I say about the conference, it's a monster that has evolved on its own. And it, since 1985, since I held that first meeting, I would say we've come close to having 8,000 or 9,000 attendees over the years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Like, as you say, you've been doing these meetings since for over 20 years now. How would you say the evolution of Bigfoot research in Ohio has gone in the last 20 years? Because that's quite a chunk of time. I'm sure you've seen it change over the years. What's your perspective on how it's grown and changed since the early 80s?
Well, the biggest thing, of course, is the advent of the Internet. Back in 1984, 85, when I first started Bigfoot research, there were very few groups out there in Ohio. There was only 2 or 3 groups at that point in time. And the Internet come along, and then you had Bigfoot groups, organizations popping up, just like weeds during the summer. They came out of the ground everywhere. And to a certain point in time, it was a good thing, but now I think we're kind of regressing. I think to a point, the advent of the Internet has been a deterrent, and as far as Bigfoot research is concerned. And the reason I say that is because to a certain point, you can get all kinds of hoaxers and tricksters getting onto these submission report forms on the Internet and turning in anything. And some organizations and groups, they just take it at face value and they report it to be the gospel, when in reality it may just be a load of BS. So to a point in the early and mid-'90s, the Bigfoot research in Ohio was progressing, but now I think we've kind of stagnated. I think we're at a point now where we're at a crossroads. Something major has to happen, or we're just going to continue to spin our wheels, so to speak, until something does happen.
And what do you mean major? Like a big sighting type of situation, event like that?
Yeah, you're going to have a major sighting with a number of credible eyewitnesses, or you're going to have to come up with some really good physical evidence, and as far as a really good series of tracks, some really good hair samples with DNA associated with them, or a part of or a major part of a body discovered, or something to that effect.
That's what we all want.
Exactly.
Now, let's say if you had your druthers and money was no object, how would you go about capturing the Bigfoot, or proving its existence, if you will?
Well, I would like to get to an area where a lot of activity is current, of course, and then I don't think we need to really capture one to prove it exists. If we could get some really good DNA, off of some hair that's non-matchable with anything that we know that exists, so to speak, we may be a step closer. But as far as proving without question that it exists to the scientific community and the majority of the general public, unfortunately, I think we're at a point where, something has to be brought in, something hardcore, and that hardcore, unfortunately, may have to be a part of a body.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. It's a strange paradox with cryptozoology and Bigfoot research, in that, to prove it exists may cost us the Bigfoot in a way, because if once they take one down, that's going to bring the crazies out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Who are going to try and get their own Bigfoot, and it's just going to be a nightmare. I talked about that with Loren Coleman once, and he was saying that, perhaps the best case scenario if one was taken down by a car or something, like if you would hit one with a car, maybe that would be the safest way to prove it.
I agree.
We'll talk a little bit about your radio show here, the Sasquatch Triangle. How can people hear it, and, what's it all about, and all that good stuff?
The Sasquatch Triangle radio talk show airs Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on Blog Talk Radio. Just go to Blog Talk Radio and enter the Sasquatch Triangle in the search box, and there you'll have the schedule come up. And, of course, whenever the show comes on live, there will be a button there to click on to listen to the show live. And there's also a chat room that you can join in on the conversation. It's becoming a little more active, of course, since winter is around the corner and more people are staying in the evenings. But you can, if you can't listen to it live, you can always download the shows. The show has been rather popular, actually. I'm quite surprised because I've only been hosting it since mid-May of this year, 2007. And on the average, in the past few months, we've averaged 750 downloads of every show. So,
oh wow, nice.
That's not too bad,
That's good stuff. Yeah, that's good, especially with how many podcasts are out there nowadays and stuff. It's good to see like a Bigfoot-based podcast, because there's only a handful of those out there as it is.
Right.
What's coming up for you? What do you have on the horizon? Is there any materials people can get? Like books or movies or stuff like that you have available? And where can people find out more information about you? Obviously, the website eobic.com is the Eastern Ohio Bigfoot Investigation Center. But what's coming up next for Don Keating, and what can people get from Don Keating that they want to find out more about you and from you?
Yeah, as you said, the website is the best way of doing it. Go there and you'll see several of my links, including the most recent video documentary that I did, which is available on VHS or DVD. It contains those images, those two video images I was speaking of earlier, and ordering information is there on the website. We've got a couple of regular meetings coming up, one on December 8th and then one in March of 2008. And then on May 17th of 2008, we will have the 20th annual Bigfoot Conference Expo located at Salt Fork State Park in East Central Ohio, which is just east of Cambridge, Ohio. And that's going to be a really good event. For the past 3+ years, we've held the conference there at Salt Fork State Park, and on the average, we've had 330 people every year show up at that conference out there at the park.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. 330 is a great number for a conference like that.
Yeah. So we're looking forward with great anticipation as to what the 20th annual conference may bring, and as far as attendees as well as speakers, we might have a couple of surprises up our sleeve, and we're going to have to wait and see how things progress during the winter months. But we could have a couple of very major speakers.
Awesome. Sounds great. And people can stay tuned to the eobic.com website for more information on that, I presume, right?
Definitely.
Awesome. Sounds great. Hey, Don, thank you so much for taking some time here to catch up with me since the conference and being so accommodating and everything in light of the technical difficulties. I really appreciate it. You're a stand-up guy. I'm really psyched to have met you, and hopefully this is just the beginning of future adventures and fun stuff like that for both of us.
Well, it sounds good, Tim. It was a pleasure to meet you in Watertown, Mass., and looking forward to possible future meetings with you. We may be over there next year for John's third annual Mass Monster Mash, and if we are, hope to cross your path once again.
Absolutely. There you go, folks. That was Don Keating. Big thanks to Don for being so understanding about the technical difficulties and taking some time to re-record the interview. You can find out more on Don at www.eobic.com. Check it out. Up next, we have Carl Feindt telling us all about his work in studying USOs, unidentified submersible objects. This is a fascinating discussion taped on location at the Mass UFO Show. Here you go, folks. Here's Carl Feindt. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash, and I'm here with the guest, Carl Feindt. And he is an expert here on USOs, unidentified submergible objects. Carl, thanks for taking some time to talk to me here.
No problem.
For starters, let's talk about what made you interested in looking into USOs.
Well, USOs do things that aircraft can't. They can't go into the water, and they definitely can't come out because we don't have engines that function in both mediums. So to me, it was an amazing craft that I'd like to find out about.
UFOs, of course, are famous. Everybody knows about UFOs, and then there's USOs that, if you say USO to people, they'll think you misspoke or something. They don't even know you're talking about. So why do you think USOs have remained sort of on the edge of the UFO phenomenon, and, people just haven't really heard as much about USOs?
Mainly there's something that was held out at arm's length, like they really couldn't possibly exist, but they do. As a matter of fact, a rather famous case 40 years ago is Shag Harbor up in Nova Scotia, not far from here. And that is a very famous and documented case. The medium just hasn't covered it because it's the flying thing that gets all the attention. But it's the same things that fly that go into the water. There's no differentiation really between. It's just an acronym type thing where you specify one from the other. So a water UFO has only lately come to the surface because of the website I put on. Before that, it's just dead. You're just talking surface.
You've looked at a lot of USO cases, of course. Mm-hmm. Would you say that primarily that they are just stay in the water, or is it they come from the sky, go into the water, and then come out of the water and go into the sky? What's your I guess you could say what's the textbook, if you will, USO case?
They do both. As a matter of fact, it's three. It's space, atmosphere, and water. It makes no difference to them. As a matter of fact, atmosphere and water are both governed by one physical principle, and that's fluid dynamics. So it really doesn't matter to them. They have the engine to do it with, which we don't have, and they have the means of entering without smashing to pieces, which we don't. So it's a craft I'm very interested in for that reason.
And one of the things that I noticed that you were talking about last night at the presentation was underwater bases and that kind of stuff. Talk a little bit about the underwater bases phenomenon and stuff like that.
Okay, well, this kind of stems from that book in 1970, which is Ivan T. Sanderson's Invisible Residence. In the book, he primarily sorts out the UFO water cases, mainly to say there's a civilization coexisting on our planet. And so there's a civilization underwater. It's kind of like the movie a long time ago called The Abyss. But in any event, I don't believe in that. We have on this planet, in this solar system, only one planet with liquid water, and that's us. So if you're going through the desert, you have a road map, And that says oasis, that's where you go. So we get a lot of visitations from various types of aliens, believe it or not, in various types of craft. And we have liquid water, so evidently they have some interest in water here, but not as a permanent base. I don't believe that.
Okay, all right. And then you also talked about UFOs sort of pulling the water up from Earth, flying over a body of water and pulling it up. Mm-hmm. I've heard of stuff like that too. I don't know. Talk a little bit about that additional phenomenon.
Okay, that's in my paper on my website called "Physical Influences of a UFO on Water." I mean, it's not the only influence that a UFO does to water. It creates bulges, depressions, which are called holes sometimes, then mounding, and then finally the water spout. The water spout is because there's a suction under the UFO, and it's all regarding the field that rotates at a very high speed to protect the UFO. This whole suction thing is like a byproduct. It's like the prop wash. That's not necessary for the flight of the aircraft. It's turbulent air in back of the aircraft, but it's a function of the propeller doing it. Well, this is a function of the field doing it, and it creates a suction underneath, and that suction sucks up cars, not cars all the way up, but it'll suck it off the road enough so your brakes don't apply, and it sucks up water. So it's a byproduct. That's strictly all. That's all it is a byproduct.
So it's not a situation like where they're taking the water to use or anything like that?
They do use water, but they come along, they ask for a bucket of water, a cup of water, they have hoses, pipes, and they suck it in that way. So it kind of emphasizes the fact that if they have an alternate means, why bother sucking it up, That's a byproduct, like I say. If they're taking water into the craft, they're doing it with a purpose. And that's what they're doing with the buckets, the tubes, and hoses and so forth. They're sucking that into the craft. But this other suction that's below the UFO, like I say, it's a byproduct. They don't need to suck it that way. And it's not going into the craft. It's just becoming more molecular as you go up and just bouncing at the bottom of the craft. It gives the impression that they're sucking up water.
And what is this? Now you're saying they ask for water, and you shared some interesting stories about that last night. Talk a little bit about that, because these are stuff that I've never heard of before.
Okay, well, in most cases they don't ask. They usually, if there's no one around, they'll just take it, Yeah. But by the same token, if there's somebody there at a place where they want to get the water from for some reason or other, they will ask, politely if they can get the water, from that place. And most of the people are kind of stunned, and it's a strange person here, and, it's kind of humanoid. And they'll say, yeah, fine, take the water, and it's kind of staring at this guy. He gets in the craft, and zing, he's gone,
As far as the USO stories that you've gotten and the cases and stuff like that, obviously it's hard to sort of put a percentage on that kind of thing, but are they primarily civilian-type things? Do you get a lot of military cases where there's USOs reported?
It's kind of 50-50. As a matter of fact, I'd hate to put a percentage on it.
Yeah.
A lot of people are doing mining or something like that, and the UFO pops down near a river that they're at. Military, it's usually a ship at sea, of course, and next thing you know, they're circling the ship. Not necessarily doing anything with the ship. There have been, where the electronic system on the ship is knocked out while the UFO is in its vicinity. The minute the UFO leaves, then everything pops back to normal again. So somehow the field or whatever it is within the craft is knocking out the means of generating or producing the electricity necessary. My website has aircraft carriers, other large ships, and UFOs as a thing, and that's strictly military there. And there are other cases of smaller UFO ships throughout all my texts. Mm-hmm. So it does cover all bases. And I just wanted to put the aircraft carriers in different perspective, because aircraft carriers are kind of like the motherships. We call them motherships. Yeah. They're actually space carriers instead of aircraft carriers. They carry their own, what you might call scout ships. Usually anywhere 10 to 30 feet in diameter. And they come out of the mothership and return to the mothership again. So it's just like an aircraft carrier at sea that has airplanes coming off the decks and then returning to the craft again. So there's kind of a similarity there in mental thoughts about what a carrier is and what a space carrier is.
And now we all know about how the UFO phenomenon seems to, obviously it's got quite a history, it goes all the way back, to ancient times. Is it safe to assume that that is the case with the USO phenomenon?
Oh, yes. My cases start at the year 1067.
Wow.
So that's back a few years. There's been quite a few cases in the 1800s, which is closer to our era, and some that were misidentified too, because the Indian Ocean has a lot of cases where they see spinning lights on the water's surface, but I don't believe that is a UFO. I believe that's what's a seismic thing. Of course, the Indian Ocean is highly seismic. Earthquakes, tsunamis, you name it. And so these things, only 99.9% of these things are seen in the Indian Ocean only. So UFOs, though, USOs, if you will, are seen all over the world. So it's you can't pin it down and say it's only coming from one spot. You can pin down these pinwheels that are on the surface of the water wheels, into one area. So it doesn't follow the USO procedure thing.
And it's safe to assume then that the USOs, these aren't limited to oceans and seas. Do you get a lot of lake USO stories, reservoir maybe USO stories, or river type stories?
All of the above. Ponds. Oh,
wow.
Most of these craft are no more than, it's an 8-to-1 ratio, 8 feet wide and 1 foot high. And so a lot of them are in the maximum 10 feet high. So all you need is 10 feet of water to hide it. And that's the case. A lot of them come into the shore, and people say there was a submarine out there. And the Navy will deny it. They said there's no way a submariner will get into 10 feet of water.
Yeah.
So, and they said, what the hell was it that came fly, out of the surface? And USO.
There you go. Where can people find out more information about your stuff? And do you have any books or anything like that coming up or already out? Tell people where they can find out more about Carl Feindt.
Okay, well, I'm thinking about a book. I'm going to start it in January, I believe. But as far as immediately, my website, which you can put in Google as just water UFO, no spaces, and I come up right at the top because it's a dedicated name site. And from there, all you got to do is scroll down once you've entered the website, and it has either cases right at the top, list of sightings, or you can go down further, and there's a 2-column thing with various specific areas about UFOs.
Awesome. Carl, thank you so much for taking some time here during the weekend to talk to us. Really appreciate it. Definitely check out his website. It's got a ton of information. I'm going to get home. I'm going to do a thorough look at it, and hopefully we can bring you back for a full-length interview type situation where we'll be at the comfort of our own homes on the phone, that kind of thing. So thanks a lot for taking some time to talk to me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
There you go. That was Carl Feindt. Big thanks to him for taking some time over the course of the weekend to talk to us. Of course, you can find out more information on Carl at the website www.waterufo.net. Pretty simple there, waterufo.net, all one word. Check it out. Following Carl here, we have the very esteemed Don Ledger to talk about the Black Triangle phenomenon, Shag Harbor, and his work researching pilot reports of UFOs. Let's take it away with Don Ledger, direct from the Mass UFO Show. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash, and I have pulled aside Don Ledger. He is a major player in the world of ufology. He's done a ton of great work, and we're gonna sit down and talk a little bit here at the conference about what he's here for and some of his great research. So, Don, thank you very much for joining me here.
Pleasure to be here, Tim.
For starters, just tell people what you're presenting on here. You were talking about the Black Triangles. Flesh that out a little bit. Tell us about your presentation some and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, I've taken an interest in the BETs. Where I'm a pilot myself, it predominantly because it sort of bothers me the way these things seem to be able to impinge on air traffic control's airspace and the airways in general. This can be a danger to flight. So I started looking into particularly the larger reports because they're kind of hard to misinterpret. Some people might see a few lights in the sky in a triangular shape. That could be possibly an airplane, but usually there's a noise associated with that. But usually the larger ones, it's pretty hard to mistake those. They're right in your face. They're up there. They're not very high. They're very, very big. So those in particular really interested me. So that's pretty much where I targeted. Those are the ones I targeted pretty much most of the time.
Talk a little bit about the sort of debate within the UFO world and outside the UFO world over the black triangles, UFO craft versus government secret project. Where do you fall on that, and what have you come to understand based on your research?
This is for that issue. Regarding that issue, I can't buy into the government military or the military or government manufactured monstrous triangle. I've done a lot of research in this area. I also have a lot of aviation material that comes into me as a pilot. I'm also a writer in aviation, have been for some years now, and so I know pretty much what the government is doing, and particularly in the United States, and that's what we're talking about. I might be a Canadian, but I predominantly research in the American side. We know the Soviet Union isn't a player anymore in this regard. They just don't have the money, and nobody in the European market. The Chinese aren't that far along yet, so that really just leaves the United States. So I know it's been suggested many times, and this same explanation has been popping up ever since 1947 after Ken Arnold. It's some kind of a secret military aircraft being developed by the government. The thing is they never ever come to fruition. Those secret military aircraft of 60 years ago, we should know about them by now. Why would the American government and the Air Force be spending billions and billions of dollars developing new weapons if they already have something that's so great that nobody can touch it? And that, as far as I'm concerned, that applies as well to the big black triangles. These things, whatever's keeping them in the sky, I don't know. Monstrous. They're quite often reported as being the size of a football field or 2 football fields. One I talked about last night in my presentation was estimated at about 3,600 feet on one side. So that's a monster. In his book, Tim Good refers to an object sighted by Lancaster pilots during the Second World War, of which they estimated to be over a mile long. When they saw it in the sky, they didn't even try to fire on it. It was at night. None of them believed that this was some kind of a German military craft. Now, we're going back into 1943 and 44 here. And so there you are. We have these monsters back then. They didn't say this was a triangle, but to be honest, they couldn't say what it was. All it was a string of lights about over a mile long, right beside their aircraft, and it just awed them. They didn't try to shoot at it. There's more to that story in his book, but so that carries on through today. We get these large monstrous triangles right up through into the Hudson Valley sightings. Here we have some kind of huge craft over modern suburbia, over neighborhoods, 50 to 500 feet in altitude above the ground, in one of the biggest track-ons in the world, the New York track-on, the New York Terminal Radar Control Area, and tracking radar control area, and which is highly illegal. Yeah. You're just not allowed to fly in an area like this without being in contact with tower or air traffic control. Everybody has to be. A lot of people miss this point, but pilots don't, because they know how illegal this can be. You know, just how much you can get your butt kicked for doing something in this regard, flying, ultralights at night and so on and so forth. There's a lot of nonsense. That was one of the explanations somebody came up with. This was an ultralight. For instance, in the Hudson Valley sighting, there was a bunch of ultralights decided to go up that night and fly in formation. That's ridiculous. It's absurd is what it is. Not only because it's crazy to fly ultralights at night normally, because they don't, usually the ultralights don't have any, particularly back in 1982, they were very basic in those days. They don't have the kind of instrumentation aboard, the electronics aboard. Basically, back then they were just barely flying. They could only fly in like 5 to 8 knot winds, and once the winds came up, that was it. You were grounded. Because you might not get back on the ground, or you could fold a wing up or so on. They're a little stronger, some of the newer ones nowadays. But anyway, in this particular instance, you had these monstrous things flying in the northern sector of New York's Terminal Radar Control Area, and with impunity. Yet these are supposed to be top secret aircraft developed by the military, yet they seem to want to test them out over, millions of people who can see them in the sky. I mean, and there are millions of people living in that area. That to me, again, is absurd. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You mentioned earlier when we were talking outside the studio about the fact that NIDS had published a report on this. And this was conjecture on their part. I actually have a picture of a conceptual picture of what they thought it might look like. Again, this tried to attribute it to some experimental aircraft that the United States government or the Air Force was building for whatever purpose. Now, in reality, what they're building are blimp-shaped objects, or not objects even, blimp-shaped aircraft, which are in development stage, which are no more, really, not much more sophisticated than what was being flown. There were blimps during the Second World War by the Navy, the German, rigid dirigibles, like the Hindenburg and so on. And these things were quite huge. I mean, the Hindenburg was over 800 feet long, and that was impressive. But still in all, there was a whole there's a whole class of aerodynamics that goes along with these things. They have to be able to push themselves through the air. That means they have to have engines powerful enough to shove them through the air. Blimps and dirigibles suffered from what's called a inverse drag, which means the larger they got, the more drag they presented to the air as they're trying to push their way through them, and through the air. And so that meant more power. More power means more weight, more fuel. It was a self-defeating purpose. And so they could only basically get these things up to around 90 to 100 knots. So even now, what the United States Air Force is experimenting with, and Lockheed Martin has been developing. I showed some pictures last year they had a test flight on one. It was only about 200 feet long, but it looked like 3 Goodyear blimps stuck together side by side. And they're using, and this one in particular right now it can't fly in anything over 10 knots. They have to land because it's just, they're hoping to get it up to about 120 mile an hour type of an aircraft, which is going to be used as some kind of a platform for surveillance and for, basically surveillance, almost like AWACS. Maybe surreptitious at night, being able to fly into an area nice and quiet, with the low-speed propellers turning around. But essentially what they're shooting for is some kind of a craft that they can get up at 100,000 feet and just hang there. Yeah. And they're over the horizon, and they're over probably even out past the border with the country that they're fighting with at the time. And so they're out of range, they're out of rocket range. No country's going to fire into another country's territory if they can help it. They're out of range, they're up there. They don't have to worry about the satellite's problem of coming down in a polar orbit, crossing over an area and only having 5 to 7, 8 minutes of time to actually do any serious photographing. And then before their elevation and angle gets as such that they can't get good video anymore. So these things can stay in the same place for months. This is what they hope to do. They haven't got this yet. But they're working on it. But here now they're spending millions and millions of dollars just to accomplish this fact. So they're trying to develop these things, for maybe operations, at 60, 80, 100,000 feet. But they're spending millions of dollars on this now. I know Lockheed Martin is doing it on their own. They don't have a contract from the government, but they're getting started now. And have spent all of this money just in developmental research. And my question is, if they're going to do that, why reinvent the wheel if they already have aircraft that are capable of doing that now, and way better than what these craft are capable of doing that they're developing right now, which are basically still blimps or balloons, really. So it just seems to me that it doesn't make any sense to me that the U.S. government or the Air Force would put out all of this funding, millions and millions of dollars, and the one I was telling you about that should hover at around 100,000 feet, they're prepared to invest $800 million in this thing. Wow. And that's a lot of money to invest in something, if you already have something that's much better than that, much technically superior, And you all have it already. What's the point of hiding these things if they're not going to use them, you know? NIDS made a good stab at it by bringing up certain type of engines that can be used now, but they didn't really get much into the structure of these things, and they were talking about a smaller aircraft than people are normally reported. Part of my talk last night was an incident in Cow Bay. I just mentioned that earlier about being 3,600 feet on a side. Yeah. Now we're talking about 3,600 feet on a side, but how thick through would something like that have to be to maintain its structure? And I did some rough math on this and checked around with a few engineers, but they figured if you're going to have something 3,600 feet on a side to support it, if there's some kind of structure inside, you're probably looking at something in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 feet thick through. That's just from the bottom to the top. This is a monster machine. And now you need the fuel to run the engines to run something like this to push it through the sky. And of course the fuel, the personnel to run it, and so on and so forth, and whatever its job is. So you're going to have all of that on board, plus the infrastructure, the structure inside the aircraft that just keeps this thing together and keeps it rigid enough to keep it in the sky. You're not, unless this thing is a series of blimps, 3,600 feet long, which seems to me to be again a little bit ridiculous. It just doesn't work for me because this is a pretty flimsy rig at this point.
And then it seems like this Black Triangle thing sort of just kind of came about in the last 20 years or so, but I'm sure that you would have more information about that. What's the chronology of the Black Triangle sightings, and do you think they sort of just came along recently, or is that something that we can trace back further?
There are Black Triangle sightings going back into the late 50s and early 60s. I have a couple myself, even from my area up in Nova Scotia. One over the Minas Basin in 1972, I believe. And there are other reports from, the United States and England and so forth of black triangular-shaped aircraft. So I believe they've been along a lot longer than this. Hudson Valley certainly brought focus to this particular type of UFO. Again, there seem to be as many shapes in UFOs as there are automobiles in the world in different shapes and makes and sizes. I don't know if that's the reason why that happens, but there are, I have one in my booklet inside there that's, I believe, 1906, where a farmer reported, it was either 1905 or 1906 in the United States, reported a black triangular-shaped object crossing over his field during the day. Now, 1906, or 1905 is, you can't explain that. We didn't have any airplanes that flew like that. In 1903, the Wright brothers barely got off the ground in 1903, and it was like 1906, 1907, 1908 before Blériot in France could even make it across the channel in that aircraft of his, and before any aircraft were strong enough to really fly much more than about 10 miles. So I don't know what this thing was back in 1905 or 6, but I'm pretty sure it was something of the UFO ilk just back in that day. I think they've been around for quite a while.
We've talked with Chris Stiles. We've had him on the show. He was on the show last spring, and of course you're very well aware with the Shag Harbor incident. You helped him out. You co-wrote the book with him. I'm sure you did a ton of research. Talk a little bit about the Shag Harbor incident, your take on it, and all that good stuff.
Well, Shag Harbor incident, Chris Stiles, as you said, has already been on the show talking about it. It's a tough story to tell in a very few minutes, as Chris will tell you. There's so many avenues and little trails that run off to the side, and interesting little events that happen. Essentially, a fisherman and 3 friends driving along in a car see something coming down out of the sky at an angle on October the 4th, 1967, around 25 after 11 in the evening, and lose sight of it after it goes down behind the trees, but just shortly after they come around from behind the trees, get close to the shoreline, get out of the car and look out and see something drifting on the water with a pale yellow light on the top of it. So they're concerned. Their take on it is that they just saw an airplane crash, and they think, maybe this is a piece of it with still one of the navigation lights. They don't carry pale yellow lights on airplanes to begin with, but they didn't know that. So Laurie Wickens, who was the primary, and this guy really started the whole thing off. Without Laurie Wickens making that phone call, we probably would never have been involved. There probably never would have been a Shag Harbor incident. So anyway, he runs down the road with his friends in the car. They make a pay phone call to the RCMP in a detachment. That's what they call their offices. Detachment back in Barrington Passage. He reports it. Werbicki, who takes the call, he's a corporal, asks him if he's been drinking because he knows Laurie Wickens. Laurie's only 17 then, but he's a fisherman now, a full-time fisherman on somebody else's boat. And so in the meantime, I guess his phone rang, as according to Ron O'Brien told me that when he was talking to Werbicki about it, Werbicki said another phone started to ring. So he asked Laurie to hang up. Well, first he asked for the phone number at the payphone, and he told him to hang up and stay put. And he went over and answered the phone, and there was several other people over a period of about 5 minutes had called in from different points around Shag Harbor, some as far away as 13 miles, saying they thought they saw something crashing in the area around Shag Harbor. It looked like an airplane coming down. So he's taking it serious at this point. Calls in the two other Mounties he's got staked out on a clearing somewhere down in Lower Woods Harbor, or Upper Woods Harbor, I think it was. They were looking for deer jackers, which is deer poachers, I think they call them down here. So he calls them back to the office. He tells them what's happening, thinks he's got a crashed airplane. They go roaring back down to a place called what was then the Irish Moss plant. And is now still there. It looks pretty much the same as it did, different paint job on it, but no longer an Irish Moss plant. It's an underwater film crew uses the place to store and do some background. And but anyway, so they're watching this thing out on the water. The thing is drifting, it seems, with the tide, or maybe it's under its own power. They're not sure. The tide is at an ebb at that point, and so. After a while, they first of all they think maybe they should try and take a dory out that's tied up close to the Irish Moss plant, and then they think maybe that's a little too dangerous. Must remember the night is clear, no clouds, lots of stars, bright starry sky, but no moon, and hardly any wind. But they still think that dory might be a little too, which is sort of a fisherman's rowboat, a little too dangerous to take out and try to get 3 or 4 people in it. Besides that, they tried to recover somebody over the side who could, tip the boat over. So Werbicki has the other 2 Mounties, which is Ron O'Brien and Ron Pond. Ron Pond is the rookie at the time, so he's given a notebook. Well, he gets his notebook out, and he's told to go around and do interviews with the witnesses. He tells Ron O'Brien, the other Mountie there, to go find a house, wake people up if he has to, make a phone call into the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. Don't forget, it's 67. They don't have the communication systems we have nowadays. Yeah. In the meantime, Werbicki himself goes to another house, wakes up some people there, gets used to their phone, calls a couple of local fishermen he knows, which is Lawrence Smith and Bradford Shand, asks them if they would take their boat out to go out on the Sound with some searchers because they think they have a downed aircraft. This whole thing takes place. Yeah. Before they actually leave, they lose sight of the pale yellow light in the water. They think it might have sunk. So it's getting even more urgent as we go. Make a long story short, they get into these fishing boats, quite a few of them actually. So they start steaming across this channel. It's the Sound, they call it, which is about maybe 2 miles wide at one point. Narrows down a bit to about maybe 1.75 miles, and about 5 miles long, which is bordered by Otter Island and the shoreline. So they steam across this, heading for what's called the budget light, and it's a buoy, and they use that as a line. Lauren Smith told me this. He said, I just sort of bore down in the budget light so that I was going across. If anything was along there, maybe I'd find it. Use as a navigation point because it's nighttime. So anyway, rather than seeing any bodies in the water, the first thing they run across is this big swath on the water, which looks like foam. Now, all the fishermen have testified to this fact that this wasn't sea foam. They all know what sea foam looks like. They were fishermen, after all, seen it all their lives. They equated it more with sort of like a thick shaving cream, maybe 3 to 4 inches thick, with sprinkly yellow glistening speckles all over the top of it. And it had some of them thought they smelled an odor of sulfur. There was some bubbling in the water, perhaps, and maybe this stuff coming up out of the water. They assumed they figured it to be at least 80 feet wide, because the boats in the day were about 40 feet long, and it would take 2 boat lengths to get through it. And they estimated it about a half a mile long. Their thinking at the time, I don't remember when I interviewed Loren Smith, he said, well, I thought at the time maybe this was some kind of byproduct of the aircraft. Maybe jet fuel mixing with seawater would cause this, some kind of foam. He'd heard about foaming and so on, mixing that up with foaming down runways, when a jet's crashing, or foaming the aircraft itself down to prevent fire. But anyway, so they didn't know what it was. They weren't fussy about sailing into it, but they didn't have much choice, so they're looking for survivors. Yeah. Some of the fishermen had knots in their stomachs because they were, particularly Normie Smith and Laurie and so on, because they're figuring they don't know what they're going to find in the water, but they figure it's going to be gory. And but they don't find anything. They don't find any bodies floating, parts of bodies flowing, no survivors. They don't find any airplane or anything. And they're searching for an hour and a half. Probably an hour and 20 minutes into the search, the Coast Guard cutter shows up from Cape Sabelano from Clark's Harbor, steams on over, has a message for Ron Pond aboard saying that RCC has responded, and they've been doing a search for, that long at least, since he called them, trying to find out if any aircraft were missing up and down the coast, and that includes the United States. They're looking for Air Force and private aircraft and commercial aircraft. Nobody was missing. Nothing was missing. Nobody could find anything missing. So I guess the fishermen at that time were probably wondering what the heck we're looking for. Well, by that time, the air desk in Ottawa, with the squadron leader William Bain, who was manning the air desk at the time, which was Canada's UFO reporting center. The RCAF's was the Air Force in the day. And he didn't take very long, probably about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, before he'd already classed this thing as a UFO and underlined it 3 times on the documents,
There's so much more. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Now, you were saying before we started taping that your primary interest is UFO, I presume, pilot reports of UFOs, that kind of thing. Just talk a little bit about your research in that realm and how long you've been doing that and what you've found out and all that good stuff.
You're probably aware of the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, run by Dr. Richard Haynes out in Washington State. Mm-hmm. And he's retired from NASA. He's a scientist there. He was chief scientist with them. And he started this organization to investigate pilot sightings exclusively, and pilot reports, air traffic controller reports. At that time, I'd already been doing that myself on my own here up in Canada, and but I became affiliated with them as what's called a technical specialist for NARCAP, but in Canada. And I've been involved in a couple of papers, the O'Hare sighting and so on. I was involved in that latest report they had. But on my own, I'd been picking up the odd report over the years from pilots or, secondary reports, some that had been around for years. People would mail them to me, because they knew of my interest. Anyway, I've had several, maybe a dozen really interesting reports of my own, things that just can't be sloughed off as conventional sighting of other aircraft. I'm sure most cases pilots aren't going to do that anyway. Space junk, boosters, meteors, satellites, and so on and so forth. Some are pretty scary. And what really concerns pilots is when these things get in close proximity to them and they don't know what its intentions are. Because they're locked into an airway, particularly airlines. They're not allowed to deviate from it, not from altitude or course. And if they do, they have to answer for it to air traffic control, because they're going to know right off the bat when they do. And if they have to do it because of some object that's all of a sudden coming close to their airplane and making them very nervous, because they don't know what their intentions are, then they have to answer for it. And that can turn into a bit of a conundrum for a pilot. A lot of pilots don't like to report these things, particularly airline pilots, because it might affect their careers.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, and there's the peer pressure, getting ridiculed by your buddies or just being ribbed about it. But, that underlying uncomfortable feeling that, they think you're a little bit weird, and they don't want that. And I'm sure military pilots don't want to do it, but I'm sure on the military side they might even have orders in these things. I know the service reports for years, which is airline reporting, was a direct result of the Cold War, but they were also looking for UFO reports as well. So you did report them, and nobody was going to laugh at you. But that's a long story. It goes, there's a lot of detail to go into on service reportings and so on. But anyway, so that's one of my interests now, and I spend a lot of time on that. I guarantee pilots anonymity, I've assigned it a case file study and just a number. If I talk about it, it's just a case file study and a number. And it pretty much stands that way now.
Where can people find out more information on you? You got a website and stuff like that, and any of the books that people can pick up that you got and all that good stuff. Tell people where they can find out more information on and from Don Ledger.
Okay. Well, I've written 3 books about UFOs, or 2 books about UFOs. One was Maritime UFO Files years ago. It's now out of print. And, of course, Dark Object with Chris Stiles. The middle book was Swiss Air Down, about the crash of Swiss Air Flight 111 off Nova Scotia. Nothing to do with UFOs. I write magazine articles for aviation and trade papers and so on. I also write other magazine articles, about UFOs for various magazines. But direct contact, they can contact me through my website at donledger.com. Now, if they go on there now, they'll find, they might be surprised to find there's a writer's workshop being advertised on the website. I haven't had a chance to take that down in the last 2 weeks since the workshop just got over about a week and a half ago.
Oh, okay.
And so if they go to at the very top of the page, they'll notice where I mentioned that I'm a pilot, and right after that there's a little blue, probably 10-point UAP in brackets, the letters UAP. If they click on that, that'll take you right through to my UFO stuff. And some of it's pretty old now. I'm in the process of changing that around because I changed my web host. I couldn't do anything before because I had a small web host and like 5 megs of space, and you can't do much with 5 megs anymore. But anyway, that's where they can find me. They'll find my email address and everything on there.
Awesome. Don, thank you so much. This has been a crazy one here. David, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tim.
There you go. Big thanks to Don Ledger for taking quite a bit of time out of the weekend to talk to us at the conference. You can find more on Don Ledger at the website www.donledger.com, DonLedger.com. Check it out. Up next, wrapping up the on-site interviews, we're talking with former BOA audio guest Chris Stiles. We're going to be finding out about what he's been up to since his BOA audio appearance, how he feels about being known as the Shag Harbor guy, and some interesting information on his other work involving reality transformation and controlled witness perception studies. Without any further ado, here's Chris Stiles making his BOA audio return at the Mass UFO Show. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash, and I'm here with former Binnall of America audio guest Chris Stiles. You probably heard him last spring. If you haven't heard him, check it out. We did an amazing, in-depth discussion on the Shag Harbor incident. I'm sure, of course, that's what he's talking about, so just tell people what you're here talking about and give them a little thumbnail on that.
Well, I came down here as part of the continuing 40th anniversary celebrations about the case, and I'm hoping here for the first time here in Massachusetts to give the people just a good overview of this enduring mystery.
And do you find there's a lot of interest here in America? I'm sure it's popular up in Canada. But what's the take down here in America as far as the Shag Harbor incident? It's sort of shadowed, I guess, by the Roswell story, of course, but it seems like now it's starting to gain a little popularity as well.
Yeah, and I've been very pleasantly surprised, Tim, because what I find is down here is that the case is differentiated enough from Roswell. There's been enough U.S. segmented and feature treatments. They seem to have grasped it, both in its similarities and mostly in its differences from Roswell. The other thing is people here seem to be sophisticated enough to realize that UFO phenomena is worldwide. They don't look at it from the borders. They want to know as much about this story as the next one. In some ways, even more so because it's new to them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I sort of presented this question to Stan Friedman before because he's pigeonholed as the Roswell guy. And, of course, you are all over the place presenting about Shag Harbor, and you're really sort of the authority on Shag Harbor. Just, I guess, describe that role, and if you find it, I'm sure you don't find it burdensome because I know that it was your own personal love and interest in the case that sort of drove your own research. But I guess just talk about being sort of typecast like that and, the pluses and minuses of that whole thing, of being associated with one specific popular case.
Well, it's a burden I'm prepared to accept, Tim. As far as I'm concerned, the thing is, Shag Harbor incident is the gift that keeps on giving ufologically. It's still an active, ongoing investigation. The heady early days of gobs of documents coming, fresh witnesses, but it still happens. I recently found 2 new witnesses that were on the Coast Guard boat. Shortly before coming down here, we had a nice little surprise. The Coast Guard sent a gentleman down to Shag Harbor, went into the post office here and turned over the actual ship's logbook, which had been lost for years, as an artifact for the Shag Harbor Incident UFO Society to hang on to. So, things are ongoing, and I do other things, and sometimes we get into that. Once, to put that in perspective, and you'll like this, a couple of years back at one of the MUFON symposiums, Don Ledger and myself were down there as presenters, and neither one of us talked about Shag Harbor. Don talked about black triangles, and I presented on reality transformation. So there's life after Shag.
There you go. We'll talk a little bit about this reality transformation. What do you mean by that? Because I didn't even know anything about this. So,
well, on Paul's website, Paul Kimball, who has the excellent The Other Side of Truth, right? You should look at the work in the section he's got on what I did on the Lower Sackville case in Nova Scotia, and it's typical of the kind of reality transformation cases I seek out. And this is in the sense of Jacques Vallée's work on that kind of thing. And I define reality transformation simply as cases that exhibit controlled witness perception.
Controlled witness perception. Flesh that out a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Typically, you would have the kind of scenario where two people stand in the same spot and observe the same UFO event and have entirely different interpretations of what just happened. And there's no physical, logical explanation for it. I consider this a marker of reality transformation, and in fact, a proof that there is such a thing as RT.
And what do you make of that sort of thing when you have two people and they see something and they have different interpretations of it? Well, what's your interpretation as the outsider looking at that situation? Now, I understand reality transformation, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it. What do you make of that? That whatever they're seeing is interacting with them specifically and shaping what they see, or what? Educate me a little.
Well, I think there's a number of combinations, and what it is you there may be a core physical real event, or there may not. But even when there is, when you attempt to control witness perception, it's not always successful. People react differently. We're all individuals, just as if we took a drug or whatever. What ultimately the purpose is, other than a screen memory or whatever, I'm not sure. And, when people discuss alien purposes, if there are aliens, I don't know their purpose. But what I'm saying is I've simply proved through police reports and other things and follow-up investigation, and believe me, Paul Kimball's website, The Other Side of Truth, on my work on the Lower Sackville case, exemplifies what I mean. He thought it was significant, and I have to agree. And I think it points out it's something that's been largely ignored in North America, the RT and the European view. I believe there's a physical reality to the UFO phenomena, but there's also a strong psychic component, and I think this is the mechanism of that component.
Okay, there you go. All right. And now, obviously, there's always going to be comparisons between Roswell and Shag Harbor, crashes, famous crashes, all that. And like we were talking off air or whatever, about how, the U.S. government, every few years, seems like every anniversary or whatever of Roswell, they try and say something about what it was, and they try and change the story around a little bit. And you were saying that's a different situation up in Canada. They're kind of hands-off on the whole thing. So since the Shag Harbor incident, has the Canadian government got involved in any way, or is it pretty much they don't want to deal with it anymore?
Well, with government, as always, one hand doesn't know always what the other does, and I'm sure there are departments that would like to see it just go away. But I can say I've never felt the presence of the hand of government interfering. Cooperation with many departments, from RCMP to D&D to National Archives, has been excellent. Had a few problems with the Coast Guard and other divisions, but look, things aren't perfect. Overall, it's very different than the U.S. situation. Currently, on the National Archives site, when you look on the Shag Harbor case, they have a nice little one-page thing with some attached documents that actually say the case was unsolved, and as far as RCMP were concerned, was far from conventional, is the term they use. And at the end it says the case remains open and solved, and the D&D believed it was a UFO. So, National Archives has actually helped promote the case by disseminating this information. And like I say, so far, cooperation's been good. Look, there's things, I'm not saying there's no evasion, and there's things get lost, but for the most part, it's been quite good.
And what have you been up to? It's only been a brief period of time since you were on the show, 6 months or so. What have you been up to since then? I know you say you took a trip out to PEI to investigate the Ebenezer story. I don't know, give us a little update on what's going on with Chris Stiles in the past 6 months.
Well, yes, I had a trip to Ebenezer. It was quite memorable and somewhat productive. It was the first time that, we went out in the field, just initially trying to relocate Interestingly enough, it's not. It reminds me of the early days of Shag Harbor. The community has forgotten this entirely. The actual eyewitnesses have moved to other locations, so it's very hard to track down the site. But we did that. I was with fellow UFO researcher from Ontario, David Savet, and it gave us a chance. It was actually just an excuse for us to meet. But as usual, when I start digging, we hit pay dirt, and I hope in the future to be able to update you and give you something quite hot, up to date. See, the only thing ever published on Ebenezer is in the book of Chris Rakowski, the Canadian UFO Report, which has a good overall treatment, but it's time to get beneath the surface of that one. I think in time, I'm not sure it's going to have the depth of Shag Harbor, but hopefully it's going to yield something more about the case and perhaps a little something about the phenomena. That's what I really look for.
And you've talked to people who had sightings or whatever with the Ebenezer thing. Have you come up with much in the way of like documentation from the government and that kind of thing? I know you had a huge, massive documents for Shag Harbor. What's the situation as far as documents go with the Ebenezer story?
Well, we have a few already. We have certainly some from the Rescue Coordination Center that were preserved in National Archives. We're currently looking for the RCMP reports because they were involved that night. RCC documents mention that at least a dozen local residents called the nearby detachment in Charlottetown, and the two minis were unseen, and the one was a witness to it before it disappeared in the trees. So we're hoping to recover those reports. They're currently they're sort of lost in National Archives, but I'm good at helping them find things. If necessary, down the road, I have a planned trip, hopefully next summer or the year after, to look for that, and a dozen other things they're having trouble locating.
Awesome. What do you have coming up down the line? Anything you want to promote or anything like that, or a website, or how can people contact you, all that good stuff?
I usually use Google. I don't have a website. And it's a good buffer zone. And look, I have a listed phone number. Anybody that's trying to reach me with information or help, you can send it to shagharbor@hotmail.com. And that's the usual Canadian spelling, all lowercase. And I look forward to your emails. And I will answer all. I'm sometimes away for up to 4 days at a time. But that works. Sometimes in Canada, you communicate whatever way you can. Phone, email, carrier pigeon, whatever works. I get back to you.
All right, awesome. Chris, thank you so much, not only for taking some time here with me today, but also for doing the great interview last spring. If you haven't heard the interview with Chris Stiles at binnallofamerica.com, definitely check it out. We go through Shag Harbor from top to bottom. It's an intense interview, and it's in-depth and thorough and awesome. And that's all thanks to Chris. I just ask the questions. He's the one that provides the information. So, Chris, thanks for taking the time here this weekend to talk to me.
Thanks, Tim, and I do thank you for your interest. Honestly, it's important. Sometimes that's all we got to go on is that people do appreciate the work. Thank you.
That does it for the BOA Audio Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash special. Hopefully you enjoyed the theme episode. 1,000 apologies for some of the interviews that may have sounded a little weird, but that's the kind of thing that happens when you're taping on location. I want to give big, huge thanks to the following folks: Loren Coleman, Chris Balzano, Don Keating, Carl Feindt, Don Ledger, and Chris Stiles. I also want to give big, super huge thanks to the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash organizer, John Horrigan. John welcomed me to the conference with open arms and pretty much gave me the run of the place. Got to do whatever I wanted, hung around in the green room, hung around backstage, and hobnobbed with the speakers. It was a great time. So big thanks to John Horrigan, and I will be seeing you at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash 3 next October. Before we dive into the Binnall of America audio listener feedback mailbag, I want to give a little mention here that this podcast that you're listening to, Binnall of America, is nominated for a 2007 Zorgie Award, which is the brainchild of former BOA audio guest Paul Kimball and his blog, The Other Side of Truth. Right now we're doing pretty well in the polling, but we could always use more votes. So if you're listening to this and you are a BOA audio enthusiast and you want to help us repeat as top paranormal podcast in the Zorgie Awards, go to binnallofamerica.com. You'll see a plethora of Zorgie links. Check those out. Click on the links. Top podcast is the first award listed. Click on Binnall of America. Vote for us. Help us stay on top of the 2007 Zorgie Awards. It would be hugely appreciated. Let's show the online esoteric world what the BOA Nation can do. Moving right along, it's time for the return of BOA Audio listener feedback. And the big return email comes from James in Washington. Here's what James has to say. Tim, Firstly, congratulations on a great start to Season 3. Jim Mars always has something interesting to say, and Karen Dolan is truly a breath of fresh air. I feel optimistic about where ufology is going, with people like the Dolans, Mac Tonys, Nick Redfern, and yourself. I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. The merging of ufology, paranormal, cryptozoology, and just about everything else weird and unexplainable you can think of seems to be the best thing to happen in years, for all the genres and subgenres of esoterica. Yes, the future looks bright. Onward to the real issue. Tim, bring back the yeah-yeahs. I miss 'em. We all do. I believe I understand your reasoning. Perhaps a few bad letters, perhaps a need to appear more professional, etc. But the yeah-yeahs have become, well, almost a trademark, emblematic of a new generation's dizzying enthusiasm for the topics at hand. Please kindly consider this request as purely constructive, and to just give it some thought. Keep up the good work. Sincerely, James, in Washington. There you go. Thank you for writing in, James. Congratulations on being the debut letter for this season's BOA Audio listener feedback. It wouldn't be BOA Audio listener feedback if we didn't bring up the classic debate from Season 2, and that is, of course, the yeah-yeahs. Last season, someone wrote in telling me to stop saying yeah when the guest was talking. I responded, of course, to explain why that sort of thing happens, and did my best to remove some of the yeahs in future interviews until I got this email here from James regarding the yeah-yeahs. As such, I've gone out of my way to include a few yeahs here and there in the interviews that are coming up, and a few mms, and also, of course, my trademark wow. Those will all be in future interviews, so don't worry, the yeahs and the wows aren't going anywhere. They're still going to be a part of the program. Although I will say that I've noticed that I've cut back on saying yeah in general during the interviews, so there's nothing really to remove from the interviews because I just don't say it as much anymore. But maybe this letter will spur me on to bring back the yeahs. I can't think of a better way to kick off BOA Audio listener feedback than the big yeah debate. Thank you, James, for the kudos and props on the beginning of Season 3. Stick around. It's only going to get better from here on out. We've got some tremendous interviews already taped that will be coming to your ears and computers in the not-too-distant future. If you want to be a part of BOA Audio listener feedback, go to binnallofamerica.com, click the contact button on the left-hand side of the screen. That'll bring you to the BOA contact page. Or, even easier, just send your emails to boaaudio@hotmail.com, boaaudio@hotmail.com. Either one of those methods puts your correspondence on the road to BOA Audio listener feedback. Up next, it is the credits portion of the program. Big thanks to the fantastic BinnallofAmerica.com staff. Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V., and Tina Senna for your help and support with the audio series and the website. Tons of stuff going on over at BOA this past week. Both R. Lee and Leslie had takes on this growing disclosure movement in the past couple weeks in the world of ufology. Leslie had some in-depth coverage of the CNN Larry King episode that covered the UFO witnesses, and Regan had her take on all of the crazy events in the last couple weeks with regards to UFO disclosure, press conferences, and media coverage. Later on in the week, Chiron covered the 9/11 Truth movement and what seems to have become the latest trend in that movement, and that is the public disruption methodology that seems to have swept the 9/11 Truth movement. Chiron has his take on what that's all about and what it might mean long-term for the 9/11 Truth movement. So as you can see, there is top-notch reading material, opinion columns, and coverage of the world of esoterica at large via the fantastic BOA writing staff. Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Jovi, and Tina Senna. As we say week in and week out here on the program, if you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns at the website, you're only getting half the story. If you are a long-time BOA Audio listener or an appreciative newcomer, and you want to help support the audio series and the website, there's a way you can do that. You go to binnallofamerica.com, click the PayPal button, and you make a donation. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards keeping the website and the podcast up and running, freely available, and ad-free for all of our great listeners the world over. Now, we've been teasing all new merchandise from BinnallofAmerica.com. The BOA line, I am happy to report, will be unveiled at BOA this coming Friday, the Friday after Thanksgiving, known by those in the know as Black Friday. We have put a ton of effort into these designs. I will discuss them more in depth next week after they've been unveiled, but suffice it to say, I feel that they capture the message of the BOA audio listeners, what they want to convey to people out there in the real world. It's not standard BOA merchandise. It's not just straight BinnallofAmerica.com stuff. It's paranormal merchandise with a special message, and hopefully the listeners of this great program will dig it and pick up some of the merchandise and help throw some change into the bucket of BOA so we can keep the franchise growing and evolving in the weeks, months, and years to come. Stay tuned to BinnallofAmerica.com this coming Friday, Black Friday, for the BOA line's grand unveiling. Last bit of business we have to take care of, and that's the preview for next week's program. This one is going to be an awesome episode. It is the first two-parter of the season. Our guest is Keith Chester, author of Strange Company, Military Encounters with UFOs in World War II, which details the often overlooked but critically important Foo Fighter era in ufology. In this installment, we're going to cover the surprising variety of actual Foo Fighter objects that were reported to be seen, how the Allied forces investigated the Foo Fighters, notable figures from that era, 10 key Foo Fighter cases will be discussed in detail, and we'll be covering the explosion of the Foo Fighter story on American shores. And all that is just part one of this marathon conversation. This is an intensely thorough edition of BOA Audio where you're almost guaranteed to walk away having heard something new, and it definitely constitutes a must-hear episode for any serious student of ufology. Keith Chester, part 1 of 2, talking about Strange Company, Military Encounters with UFOs in World War II, the Foo Fighter era of ufology, in tremendous detail, top to bottom, next week on Binnall of America Audio, Season 3. And on that note, there's not much left to say, my friends. I want to wish all of our great American listeners a fantastic Thanksgiving holiday. Have a wonderful time with your families. Enjoy the meals. Enjoy the time to kick back and relax. I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. We'll be back next week with more underground, esoteric audio, as only BOA can provide. Until then, this is Tim Binnall, thanking you for listening and signing off.